Rain poured down in thick sheets, drenching the flower petals that had been carefully arranged along the aisle. People from various states were in Belize for this grand destination wedding. The bride stood frozen at the altar, her white dress soaked through, the intricate lace clinging to her trembling body. "Sienna, wait!" A deep, familiar voice cut through the storm, sending a jolt through her spine. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. There he was, Elias, her childhood best friend, her first love, and the one man she had spent years trying to forget. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Elias rushed forward, rain slicking his dark hair to his forehead. His navy suit was rumpled, his tie askew, but his piercing hazel eyes held the fire of a man with something left to say, something that should have been said long ago. Sienna's fiancé, Jonathan, stood rigid beside her, his perfectly coiffed hair beginning to frizz under the rain. His grip on her hand tightened painfully. "What the hell is this?" Elias ignored him. His gaze never wavered from Sienna's. "Please," he breathed, "tell me you don't love me. Tell me you don't think about me every single night the way I think about you. And I'll walk away." Tears blurred her vision, mingling with the rain. This wasn't happening. Not today. Not now, when she had finally convinced herself that Elias was just a memory. "Sienna, let's go," Jonathan snapped, his voice cutting through her turmoil like a knife. Elias took a step closer, his soaked shirt clinging to his frame. "I let you go once. I won't make that mistake again." The world held its breath. So did she as gasped and collective murmur spread through the wedding guests that flew in from the States. A week later, the newspaper still hadn't moved on from the scandalous wedding disaster. Sienna had locked herself in her room in the hotel, needing space to think, to breathe. But peace was a fragile thing, especially when Elias showed up at her door. She opened it hesitantly, her heart pounding. "How did you find me?" He smiled, but it was tinged with regret. "I always know where to find you." Her lips pressed together. "Elias, Don't say you're sorry. Just talk to me. Just let me in." Sienna hesitated, then stepped aside. As he walked in, dripping rain onto the tiled floors, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over, and maybe she didn't want it to be. Elias stood at the door, running a hand through his damp hair. Sienna crossed her arms, keeping a safe distance, afraid that if she got too close, she might forget why she had left in the first place. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured. He smirked. "Yet, here I am." Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words. The past, the years of longing, the aching regret, it all simmered beneath the surface. "You left me, Elias," she finally whispered, voice trembling. "You let me believe you didn't love me anymore." His jaw tightened. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought letting you go meant you'd be happy. But watching you up there, about to marry him, I couldn't breathe, Sienna. I couldn't stand it." Her heart pounded. "And what do you expect me to do now? Just drop everything because you suddenly changed your mind?" "No." He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "I just need you to admit it, that you still feel something, that I'm not alone in this." She swallowed hard. The thunder crash mirroring the heat rising between them. And in that moment, With the storm howling outside and the ghosts of the past pressing in, Sienna knew one thing. This was far from over. Elias stayed, despite Sienna's protests. He wasn't leaving until they had said everything left unsaid. They spent the next few days locked in an unspoken battle of distance and stolen glances. Mornings were spent sipping coffee in separate places. Afternoons brought tense, clipped conversations that neither wanted to have. And nights were the hardest. She would catch Elias standing on the porch, staring at the stars like they held all the answers. She wanted to ask what he was thinking, but she was terrified of the answer. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. Sienna turned, her stomach twisting. No one knew she was here. No one except... She stepped forward cautiously, pulling the door open, only to be met with Jonathan's furious glare. Behind him stood Daniel, a tall, striking man with sharp features and an undeniable presence. "I'm Daniel," the stranger said smoothly, "Elias's fiancé." Silence crashed over them like a tidal wave. Sienna's breath caught, and Elias visibly paled. The silence stretched unbearably. The words hung between them, as heavy and inevitable as the storm that had chased Elias to the wedding. Sienna's fingers gripped the edge of the door, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Fiancé?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel tilted his head, his dark eyes flicking between them. "Yes, fiancé, as in, we were supposed to get married in 2 weeks, but it seems Elias has been rather distracted." Elias's mouth opened and closed, his usually sharp tongue momentarily useless. His gaze darted to Sienna, then back to Daniel, like a man standing at the edge of a precipice. "Daniel, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," Daniel countered smoothly, stepping into the room uninvited. The tension thickened as he assessed Sienna with cool curiosity. "So you're the one who still has his heart." Sienna inhaled sharply, her gaze snapping to Elias. "You were engaged, and you didn't think to tell me?" Elias hesitated, shame flickering in his eyes. "Because I thought I lost you. Because I was tired of wanting something I couldn't have. And Daniel, he was safe." Daniel's jaw tightened at that, but his voice remained eerily calm. "Safe? Right. Well, that's reassuring." Sienna turned away, her hands trembling. "I can't do this. Not again." Elias reached for her, but Daniel stepped in between them. "I think you've done enough," he said coldly. "Come on, Elias. We need to talk." For a long moment, Elias just stood there, his heart caught between the past and the present. Then, with a heavy sigh, he followed Daniel out the door. Sienna pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heart to slow, but it was no use, because deep down she knew the truth. This wasn't over, and maybe it never would be. Sienna barely had time to catch her breath before a knock sounded at the door again. Her pulse quickened as she hesitated, half expecting Elias to return. But when she opened it, she was met with an entirely different face. Jonathan. His usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by something raw and seething beneath his polished exterior. "We need to talk." Sienna stiffened. "Jonathan, You humiliated me, Sienna," he cut in, stepping inside without invitation. His voice was calm, but the tightness in his jaw spoke volumes. "In front of our families, our friends." She swallowed hard. I never meant to hurt you. Then what did you mean to do? Because from where I stand, it looks like you let a ghost from your past ruin our future. His voice cracked slightly, the anger laced with something deeper. Pain. Guilt weighed heavy on her chest. Jonathan, I didn't plan any of this. Elias showing up, everything. It's just as much a shock to me as it was to you. Jonathan let out a sharp laugh. Right. And yet, you didn't push him away. You didn't tell him to leave. Sienna looked down, unable to deny the truth. Jonathan exhaled, his frustration evident. I loved you, Sienna. I still do. But maybe I was never enough, was I? Her throat tightened, but before she could respond, another voice echoed from the hallway. Jonathan, leave her alone! Both of them turned to see Elias standing there, his expression dark with warning. Daniel was behind him, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Jonathan scoffed. Of course, the hero returns. Elias stepped forward. This isn't about you and me. It's about her. Let her breathe. Jonathan shook his head, his lips curling in disdain. You don't get to act like the noble one here, Elias. You had your chance. You left her. And now you're back, ruining her life all over again. Sienna felt the walls closing in around her, the weight of their expectations pressing down. Too many emotions, too many unanswered questions. And at the center of it all, her heart, torn between a man she once loved and a man she should have married. One choice could change everything. And she wasn't sure she was ready to make it. Before another word could be spoken, Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his face paling. Without a word, he stepped away to answer it. A moment later, he turned back, his expression unreadable. Elias, we need to leave. Now. Elias frowned. What? Why? Daniel hesitated before saying, because if we don't, we might not get another chance. Someone's been looking for you, and they're getting close. Sienna's breath hitched. Who? Daniel's gaze flickered to Elias before settling on her. His wife. Silence descended over the room like a shroud. Sienna's mind raced, her pulse hammering in her ears. His wife? She echoed, barely able to comprehend the words. Elias visibly tensed, his face a mask of controlled panic. Daniel, what the hell are you talking about? Daniel took a step closer, lowering his voice. I mean exactly what I said. She's here, Elias, and she's not happy. Jonathan let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. This just keeps getting better and better. First he crashes a wedding, then he's engaged to another man, and now you're telling me he has a wife? Sienna swallowed hard, nausea threatening to overtake her. She turned to Elias, her voice barely a whisper. Is it true? Elias looked like a man backed into a corner, his hazel eyes darting between her, Jonathan, and Daniel. It's complicated. Daniel scoffed. No, it's not. Either you married her, or you didn't. Before Elias could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, sharp and unyielding. A moment later, the door burst open, revealing a woman standing in the threshold. Her dark hair clung to her rain-dampened skin, and her eyes burned with fury. Well, Elias, she said, her voice laced with venom. Surprise! Sienna felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her feet. The woman's gaze flickered over her, assessing, before landing squarely on Elias. Who is she? The woman demanded, nodding toward Sienna. Another one of your mistakes? Elias clenched his jaw. Renee, not here. "Oh, I think right here is perfect," Renee shot back, "because I want answers. I want to know why my husband disappeared for months only to turn up at some wedding, professing his undying love for another woman." Jonathan turned to Sienna, his voice dripping with mockery. "And you thought I was the worst option." Sienna ignored him, her focus pinned on Elias. "Tell me the truth," she pleaded. "Were you ever going to tell me about her?" Elias let out a ragged breath, looking more defeated than she'd ever seen him. "I thought I could fix things first, before you found out." Renee laughed bitterly. "Fix things? You mean run away and pretend I didn't exist? You married me, Elias, and now you're standing here tangled up in another woman. Does she even know what you're really running from?" Sienna's stomach twisted. "What is she talking about?" Elias didn't answer, but Daniel did. "Tell her, Elias," he said, his voice cold. "Tell her why you really left." Elias closed his eyes briefly before exhaling. "Because I was running from more than just my past. I was running from something that could destroy everything." Sienna's voice wavered. "What is it?" Renee's eyes gleamed with something close to satisfaction. "Because Elias owes people, dangerous people, and they finally found him." A cold dread settled over Sienna as the weight of those words sunk in. This wasn't just about love or betrayal anymore. This was something far worse. This was a matter of life and death. Sienna remained on the porch long after Elias, Daniel, Jonathan, and Renee had disappeared into the night. The cold air bit at her skin, but she welcomed it. It was grounding, a reminder that she was still here, still standing. She looked out at the water, at the gentle waves that kept moving forward, no matter what. Maybe it was time she did the same. With a deep breath, Sienna stood up, ready to embrace whatever came next. Her phone buzzed again, a reminder of the message from her old friend inviting her to a new city, a new adventure. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp morning air fill her lungs. It was time. Packing was easier than she expected. Each item she tucked away felt like shedding another layer of what had been holding her back. The memories would always be there, but they didn't have to define her anymore. By noon, she was on the water taxi that took her to the mainland of Belize City. She didn't know exactly what awaited her, but that was the beauty of it. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from something. She was running towards something. As she boarded the plane that was taking her back to the States, she thought about Elias, about Daniel, about Jonathan, all the people who had shaped her story in different ways. They had each left their mark, but now it was her turn to take control. Healing takes time, but with courage, self-discovery, and the right people by your side, you can embrace new beginnings. Moving forward isn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to live fully in the present and believing in the promise of the future. Sienna's journey teaches us that we are not defined by heartbreaks or setbacks, but by our ability to rebuild, rediscover happiness, and open ourselves to unexpected possibilities. This is the conclusion of Starlit Promises, a Caribbean romance story. If you enjoyed my story, give it a thumbs up. Comment so that I may know your thoughts, and share it with your friends. Subscribe to enjoy more Caribbean romance stories. Let the rhythm of the waves and the allure of tropical nights sweep you away. Explore more enchanting Caribbean romance stories that will leave you longing for sunsets and second chance. This is Irene Pandy Slusher saying don't stress, but, as we say in Belize, go slow.